It was 2014 and I was a senior in high school. At the time, I lived in Central Texas, but my brother was in school in Colorado. Since he was graduating soon and I hadn't yet visited, I decided to drive out to him when our spring breaks aligned. The only issue was that I technically wasn't supposed to be driving. Believe it or not, despite being a dumbass 18-year-old who liked to drive fast, I never had a traffic violation. Never even gotten a parking ticket. I did, unfortunately, get caught drinking with my buddies a week prior to the drive. My license was suspended for 30 days, but I didn't let that stop me. I was gonna see my brother one way or another, so I left late in the day, chugged Red Bulls to stay alert, and stuck to the backroads as much as possible. It added a few hours to my trip, but it allowed me to avoid state troopers for the most part. By midnight, I felt like I was in the Australian outback. I had taken road trips through my state before, but this particular route was something else. There was nothing but scrub brush and signs that were way too weather-beaten to read properly. I was so busy thinking about how utterly isolated I was that I almost missed the orange traffic cone in the road, placed square atop a yellow center line. I reduced my speed, but I didn't stop. I was confident that there was no work being done on the road. I had checked the maps prior to setting off and there would have been more signage to alert people. Since I knew there was no construction in the area, I found the placement of the cone a little odd. Of course, junk on the road isn't such a rarity, but the way it aligned perfectly with the meridian line felt intentional. A few miles later, my drive was again interrupted. My high beams reached far into the night, providing enough visibility for me to see another oddity. There was something else in the road, this time in my lane. I squinted. Another traffic cone? It was tall enough, but not quite thin enough. I slowed down a little more. I remember thinking, that can't possibly be a person. I got a little closer. Lo and behold, it was. I veered into the other lane, but the person in the road mirrored my car, clearly trying to get me to stop. They threw one of their arms out as if welcoming the cold, metal embrace of my front bumper. I slammed on the brakes abruptly enough to give myself whiplash. Confusion and anger rose up in me as I turned my headlights down and got a better look at the person in front of me. I regretted stopping once I could see the man more clearly. At first glance he seemed like a normal guy. He was tall and middle-aged, clad in blue jeans and a long, tan coat. He had no particularly distinct facial features, except for a set of blue eyes that somehow seemed too small for his face. He gave me a wide grin when he saw me stop. I guess he could have just been relieved, but I couldn't give him the benefit of the doubt due to what he was holding. Balled up in his hand was something small, furry, and bloody. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it kinda looked like a dead rat. I had no idea why he'd be holding such a thing, and it didn't really matter. All I knew was that there was something wrong with the guy. A suspicion only exacerbated by the fact that he still had one of his hands behind his back. Was he hiding something? A weapon maybe? I took my foot off the brake. I might have been dumb enough to stop, but at least I wasn't dumb enough to stay. As I tried to maneuver around him, the man again moved in front of my car, but when he saw I wasn't going to stop, he took a step back. As he did so, he let his arms fall to his sides, and I saw what he'd been concealing behind his back. It was a large claw hammer. I sped off, not entirely believing what had just happened. There was a small chance that the guy genuinely needed help, but I sure wasn't going to stick around to figure that out. As I drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror. Before the darkness swallowed him, I saw the man starting to run after my car. For a second, the sight made me nervous, but then it just made me laugh. Did he actually think he was going to catch up? I watched him disappear from view with a smile on my face. Goddamn idiot, I said to myself. Now here's the punchline. No sooner did the words leave my mouth than my car jolted forward with a sickening thud. I looked back at the road, but it was too late. There came several pops in quick succession, loud as gunshots. My dashboard lit up like a switchboard, warnings blinking uselessly as my tires chewed themselves to pieces beneath me. The car started to drag left, the steering wheel fighting me as a low, flapping sound rose up from the wheels. When I stopped the car, I gave myself a moment to catch my breath, then threw the door open and hopped out. Using the flashlight I kept in the glove box, I assessed the damage. All 4 tires were shredded, strips of rubber curling off like dead skin. I just stood there for a second, light shaking in my hand, unable to believe how fast everything had happened. I angled the beam back down the road, sweeping over cracked asphalt and weeds. 50 meters back, half hidden in the dark, was a spike strip. I hadn't seen the damn thing at all. Between where I'd encountered the man and where I'd hit the stinger, there was a slight hill. I couldn't see over the hill, couldn't see much of anything, but somehow I knew I was being pursued. The man with the hammer, who was probably the one behind the traffic cone and the spike trap, was making his way toward my car at that very moment. I had only put about a half-mile of distance between us, which meant I had maybe 5 minutes tops to figure out what to do. I checked my phone and, as luck would have it, I had no reception. My first thought was to get back in the car and lock the doors, but what good would that do me against a hammer-wielding maniac? I could run out into the fields on either side of the road, but there was really nowhere to hide out there, and I was loath to isolate myself even further from help. My plan, if it could even be called that, was to run. First, I turned on my headlights to alert passing cars. Then I grabbed my phone, wallet, keys, and flashlight out of the car and mentally prepared for a very long jog. Thankfully, I was a cross-country runner in high school, and I had good endurance. While I knew I couldn't run all the way to the next town, I knew that another car had to show up eventually. I'd flag them down and ask for help, or at the very least I'd probably stumble into an area with reception and call the police. I shut and locked my poor, crippled car, then took a glance behind me. He was cresting the hill, less than a quarter mile out. Something about the bend in the road, coupled with the low lighting, make his long, loping stride seem unnatural. He seemed like he was floating. I was already freaked out, but seeing that made me feel like I was being chased by something not entirely of this world. I turned and ran. I fought the urge to sprint, knowing I couldn't afford to wear myself out right away. Once a minute, I glanced behind me. My flashlight beam wasn't powerful enough to reach him, but I could still see the faint silhouette of the man against the cloudless, starry sky. He was small on the horizon, but he was there nonetheless, and worse, he was gaining on me. 5 minutes turned to 10, and I couldn't believe that he hadn't given up already. I told myself he couldn't keep up the pace, and yet every time I turned around, he was a little closer than before. At some point, I tried shouting out, tried asking what he wanted, but of course there was no answer. Soon I was wiping sweat from my brow and thanking God that I'd been wearing athletic shoes on my drive. As I looked over my shoulder for a routine check-in, I saw the shimmer of headlights. There was a pickup truck ambling toward me. I bolted straight into the middle of the road, waving my arms around and shouting for help. For a second, the truck slowed, but then it eased around me and kept right on going. No windows rolling down, no honk. The bastard didn't even stop long enough to see what my deal was. I shouted something at the shrinking, red tail lights, but it didn't matter. My salvation had left me in the dust. I stood there long enough to realize that standing still was a bad idea, and then I pushed down my rage and disbelief. I looked behind me once again, and strangely, that time, I didn't see anyone. Maybe my pursuer had fallen behind, or maybe he had given up entirely. Or, hell, maybe I'd hallucinated the entire thing and abandoned my car in the middle of nowhere for no reason. In any case, I kept moving, periodically checking my phone. I guess I was due for some luck that night, because after another half mile, I saw a car on the side of the road, a red Dodge Charger. It was turned off and dark inside, but the tires were perfectly intact. There was no visible damage on the car, certainly no evidence of hitting a stinger, and that fact made me wonder if it belonged to my pursuer. I made my way to the car. There was no person inside, but there were still keys in the ignition. Usually, this is where I end my story. Dodge ex machina to the rescue. I settled into the driver's seat and breathed an enormous sigh of relief when a turn of the keys brought the engine roaring to life. By some miracle, the car was drivable, and it had enough gas to take me to the next town. Finally confident that I would survive the ordeal, I looked out the passenger side window and saw something that made my heart stop. Yards away from my car and rapidly closing the distance was the man. He hadn't given up at all. He'd merely started running in an arc through the fields, avoiding the road that I'd watched so diligently, and so uselessly. He had banked on me losing sight of him so he could catch me off guard, and it had almost worked. By the time I slammed my foot on the gas, he practically had his fingers on the handle. I caught one last glimpse of him in the side mirror as the Charger tore off. TT was a pale, grinning blur closing in faster than should have been possible. After that, I drove the car straight to the police station in the next town. At dawn, when they took me back to recover my own vehicle, every single window had been shattered. Not simply cracked, but obliterated. Nothing had been stolen from my car, which somehow made everything worse. As far as I know, they never found the man with the hammer. Here's the part I generally omit from my little story. When I, exhausted and nearing my limit, finally made it to the Charger, the driver's side door was open. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. The cabin was a wreck. Blood was smeared over the wheel, gearshift, and driver's seat, like some injured creature had been thrashing around. The windshield was cracked from the inside. From the open door trailed a dark streak through the gravel and weeds, a crushed path, mottled with red, where something heavy had been dragged. I let my beam follow the indentation until it caught on something still and misshapen. There was a man lying there on his back, some poor bastard who, most likely, had offered a ride to a downtrodden traveler. His mouth hung open as if he died while trying to speak. His skull had been bashed in. Part of it was just gone, leaving a cave above his eyes where something heavy had landed over and over again. The white of his skull shone moon-like under my light. That matted clump in the hitchhiker's hand wasn't roadkill. It was a whole goddamn scalp.